Have you ever wondered what really happened in the room before you checked in? Late at night, when the highway empties and neon signs buzz over near-deserted parking lots, motels become something else. Thin walls hold on to arguments, last phone calls, and prayers no one answered. The air smells faintly of bleach and stale smoke. The carpet hides old stains, and the security cameras never seem to catch what matters. A motel horror story doesn't begin with a scream. It starts with a tired traveler, a cheap room key, and a door that doesn't quite close all the way. Tonight, you're about to hear what some guests saw, and why a few rooms are never rented twice. Tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there, and subscribe to our channel for more horror stories that'll keep you up at night. Story 1. My name is James Hartley, and I've worked a night shift at the Crimson Motor Inn for 7 years. The Crimson isn't the kind of place tourists choose. It's the kind of place people end up when they're desperate, broke, or running from something. Located off Interstate 40 in northern New Mexico, about 90 miles from the nearest significant town, the motel has 36 rooms arranged in a U-shape around a parking lot that rarely fills up completely. Most nights I'm the only staff on duty. A night manager, a housekeeper who comes in the mornings, and that's it. I check people in, I handle emergencies. I try not to ask too many questions about the people who rent rooms by the hour, or who arrive at 3 in the morning with nothing but a change of clothes and desperate eyes. I've learned not to be curious about my guests. Curiosity gets people hurt in places like this. But in the winter of 2014, something happened at the Crimson that made me understand that sometimes ignorance isn't protection, it's complicity. It started with a room that wouldn't stay rented. Room 23 was at the far end of the eastern wing, the least desirable location, because it was furthest from the office and closest to the highway noise. We could barely charge $40 a night for it, and usually we could only rent it during peak times when we had overflow. But in January 2014, something changed. People started renting it regularly, not the usual transient crowd. These were different guests, older men, mostly, arriving alone, staying 1 or 2 nights, paying cash, leaving no forwarding address. Nothing unusual about that except for the consistency and the fact that they were specifically requesting room 23. I didn't think much about it until I noticed something else. One of our regular housekeeping staff, a woman named Maria who'd worked at the Crimson for 4 years, refused to clean room 23 anymore. She started calling in sick on the days she was scheduled to service that room. Finally, I asked her about it directly. "There's something wrong with that room," she said quietly. She was from a small town in Mexico originally, deeply religious, and she took things seriously that most people would dismiss. "What do you mean wrong?" I asked. "I don't know how to explain it," she said. "When I clean it, I feel watched, and the smell. There's a smell that doesn't go away no matter how much I clean. It's like death, like something died in the walls and nobody found it." I checked the room myself. Maria was right about the smell. It was faint but persistent, something organic and wrong underneath the chemical cleaning products. And the room felt cold, even when the thermostat was set to 75 degrees. But there was no visible source for the smell. I checked under the beds, in the closet, examined the walls for dead animals or signs of decomposition. Nothing. I reported it to the owner, a man named Richard Voss who lived in Albuquerque and visited the motel about once a month. Richard listened to my concerns, then said something that made the situation worse. "Don't worry about it," he said. "Room 23 is doing fine. Keep renting it. But there's a smell." I started. "I said don't worry about it," Richard said. "Some guests prefer that room. As long as it's paying rent, leave it alone." But the smell was getting worse. By mid-February, it had become noticeable even in the parking lot when the wind came from the east. And Maria refused to work at all anymore. She just quit. I had to find a new housekeeper, and the new housekeeper, a young woman named Sophie, complained about room 23 within her first week. The smell made her gag. The room felt oppressive. She didn't like being in there alone. I called Richard again. "We need to have this room inspected," I said. "There's something wrong with the plumbing or the HVAC system or something. Something is decomposing in the walls." "James," Richard said, his voice very quiet, "do not inspect that room. Do not investigate it. Do not do anything except rent it out and clean it when guests leave. Are we clear?" "No, we're not clear," I said. "This is a health hazard." Richard hung up. That was when I started to understand that whatever was happening at room 23, it wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. It was being allowed to continue, and I was being told explicitly not to look too closely. I started keeping records. I documented which guests rented room 23, the dates they arrived, how long they stayed. At first the pattern seemed random, but over time I noticed something. The men who rented room 23 were very specific in appearance. Middle-aged, typically older, ranging from maybe 45 to 65. Well-dressed, not the typical crimson clientele. They arrived in decent cars, not luxury vehicles, but nothing beat up. They paid cash, always a $100 bill for a $40 room, always said keep the change, always avoided eye contact. And they all stayed exactly one night. In 3 months, I documented 43 men renting room 23. 43 different men, all matching the same profile, all staying one night, all leaving the next morning around dawn. I asked Sophie to pay attention to the room on checkout days. She reported that room 23 was always spotless when the guests left. No trash, no sign of use. It was like no one had slept there at all, despite the beds being unmade. In April, I decided to do something I probably shouldn't have. I got a key to room 23 and went inside during the day when it was unoccupied. The smell hit me immediately, so strong it made my eyes water. It was coming from inside the walls, definitely, or from the crawl space beneath the floorboards. But there was something else, a kind of psychological weight to the room that I can only describe as presence. The air felt thick. The light from the window seemed wrong, like it wasn't reaching the corners properly. I checked the bathroom. The toilet was clean. The shower was clean. There was no obvious source for the smell. But when I looked at the mirror, I noticed something odd. There was a smudge on the glass, not dust or dirt, but something deliberate. It looked like it had been wiped across the mirror from the inside, but mirrors only have a reflective surface on one side. The other side is the wall. I felt along the wall behind the mirror. It seemed solid. Then I noticed the outline of the mirror frame didn't quite match the wall. It was slightly offset, like it had been adjusted recently. I tried to remove the mirror. It was hung with heavy-duty brackets, bolted into the wall. But when I got down on the floor and looked underneath, I could see into a gap between the mirror and the wall. And in that gap, there was something. I couldn't see what it was clearly, but it looked like fabric, and the smell was much stronger coming from that gap. I called the police, not Richard, not the owner. The police. What happened next moved very quickly, and then stopped moving altogether. 2 state police officers arrived within an hour. I showed them the mirror, the gap, the smell. They called in a forensic team. The forensic team removed the mirror carefully and discovered what was behind it. Someone had created a hidden compartment between the mirror and the wall about 18 inches deep, and inside that compartment was a video camera mounted on a stand, angled toward the bed, pointed, at an angle that would capture anyone standing at the foot of the bed or sitting on it. The camera's battery was dead, but the memory card was full of footage, hours and hours of footage. The police executed a search warrant on the motel. What they found in the office safe behind Richard's desk was a filing system. Detailed records of 43 transactions, names, photos, payment information, dates of stay, but not names of guests, names of the men who'd rented room 23. It appeared that someone had been systematically recording sexual activity or intimate moments in that room. And based on the filing system, there was a network involved. Someone creating the recordings, someone distributing them, and someone, somewhere, collecting payment. Richard was arrested. The police also arrested the manager of 2 other motels across the state who had similar arrangements in their properties. But the investigation stalled when it came to identifying the men who'd rented the room. The footage on the camera's memory card had been corrupted or deliberately destroyed. The files were there, but they wouldn't open. The names in Richard's filing system didn't correspond to any identifiable individuals. The payment information was useless, and none of the men who'd stayed in room 23 could be located because they'd all provided fake information at check-in. What came out during Richard's trial was even more disturbing. He admitted that he'd been providing room 23 as part of a broader operation, that he claimed he didn't control. He was just the location provider. The recordings were made and distributed by someone else, someone Richard claimed he'd never met. Payment came through untraceable channels. Richard's role was simply to maintain the room, to screen guests who rented it, to ensure they were the right people, and to keep the camera operational. Who were the men who rented the room? The prosecutor asked. I don't know, Richard said. They came through a referral system. Someone would send me a message with a booking request. I'd verify that the person matched the profile, rent them the room, and that was it. What profile? The prosecutor pressed. Richard hesitated. Vulnerable men, he said finally. Lonely men, men who'd been contacted online and told they could have a private, intimate encounter in a secure location. Men who were specifically chosen because they had something to hide. Men who wouldn't report what happened to them because they were ashamed, or because they were married, or because they didn't want anyone to know where they'd been. And what happened to them in that room? The prosecutor asked. I don't know, Richard said. That wasn't my part. But the evidence suggested that what happened was this. Lonely men were lured to room 23 with the promise of a private encounter. Once they were in the room, they were recorded. The recordings were used as blackmail to extract money or compliance, or they were simply distributed as content. The men who rented room 23 were victims of a sophisticated predation operation. I testified at Richard's trial. I described the smell, the guests, my documentation, everything I'd observed. The prosecutor asked me a crucial question. Did you report your suspicions to anyone before contacting the police? I hesitated. I reported them to the owner, I said. Multiple times. He told me not to investigate the room. And you complied? The prosecutor asked. Yes, I said. The prosecutor let that hang in the air. Richard's defense attorney used this against him. My client is not on trial for failing to thoroughly investigate the room. The real question is, did he knowingly participate in a scheme to extort or sexually abuse the men who rented that room? And the evidence suggests he was aware of illegal activity, but awareness is not the same as criminal conspiracy. In the end, Richard was convicted of money laundering and facilitating a criminal enterprise, but not on the more serious charges the prosecution wanted. He received 10 years. The men who'd actually created the recordings, who distributed the content, who'd run the broader operation, they were never identified. They were never arrested. I quit the Crimson 2 months after the investigation. I couldn't work there anymore. Every time I saw room 23, I thought about all those men who'd come looking for connection and had instead found predators. I thought about what had been done to them. I thought about the shame they must have felt, shame that probably kept them from reporting it, shame that the operation was designed specifically to exploit. And I thought about how I'd worked there for 7 years, how I'd noticed something wrong, and how I'd accepted a manager's instruction to ignore it. Before I left, I pulled the maintenance records for room 23 going back as far as they existed. I wanted to understand how long the operation had been running, how many men might have been victimized. The hidden compartment behind the mirror had been installed at least 9 years earlier, based on when the wall had been last worked on. 9 years. That meant potentially hundreds of men had been recorded without their knowledge or consent. Hundreds of men who'd been selected for their vulnerability and exploited for profit or power. And nobody had caught it until the smell got strong enough to be undeniable. If you ever stay at a motel, check the room carefully. Look at the mirrors, test them, see if they're solid or if there's space behind them. Check the bathroom vents, the smoke detectors, anywhere a camera could be hidden. Look for anything that seems out of place or positioned oddly, and if something feels wrong, if a room smells strange, if there's something off about the temperature or the light, if you just feel unsafe, trust that instinct. Change rooms immediately. Tell the manager. Call the police if you need to, because predators use motels the way spiders use webs. They understand that motels are places where people are vulnerable, where they're far from home, where they're less likely to report abuse because they're often already doing something they're ashamed of or hiding from someone. The Crimson Motor Inn is still operating. Room 23 is still rented. I'm told they completely renovated it after the investigation, removed the hidden compartment, sealed the walls, painted everything new. But I sometimes wonder if that smell is really gone, or if it's just hiding deeper inside. And I wonder how many other motels across the country have similar arrangements that haven't been discovered yet. How many rooms with hidden cameras? How many vulnerable people being systematically victimized? How many night managers, like I was, aware that something is wrong, but accepting a manager's reassurance that it's not their problem to solve? The operation that was running at the Crimson is still operating somewhere. The people who created the recordings, who distributed the content, who selected the victims, they're still out there. And they've learned from the Crimson's exposure. They'll be more careful next time, more subtle, better at hiding, because the only consequence of their operation being discovered was a 10-year sentence for a man who was just the location provider, not the architect, not the predator, not the person who caused the actual harm. That's the calculation they're making. That's why they'll do it again. Story 2. My name is Derek Halverson, and I've managed the West Side Budget Lodge in Tulsa, Oklahoma for 11 years. The West Side isn't fancy. It's the kind of place where traveling salesmen sleep, where families with. Broken down cars wait for repairs, where people with nowhere else to go rent rooms by the week. We have 64 rooms, a parking lot that faces the street, and a reputation for asking no questions and providing clean sheets. I came to this job after leaving the construction industry. I needed something quieter, something where I could work steady without the physical strain getting to me. The night shift suited me. Fewer people to deal with, less drama, just me and whoever checked in between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. Most nights were routine. Check people in, answer the occasional question about restaurants or directions, make sure nobody's car got stolen from the parking lot. But in the fall of 2009, a woman checked in who changed everything. She arrived on a Tuesday evening, just after I came on shift. She was maybe 60 years old, thin, with gray hair pulled back in a bun. She wore a navy blue dress that looked expensive but well worn. She had one small suitcase and a purse. She paid cash for 2 nights, our standard rate, and asked for a room on the first floor, away from the office. I gave her room 18, at the far end of the western wing. She seemed unremarkable, quiet, polite, tired. She took the key without asking questions and left. Nothing about her suggested that she was anything but a regular guest. But the next morning, when our housekeeper went to clean the room, she'd only stayed 1 night instead of 2. The housekeeper found something that made her call me immediately. The room was spotless. The bed had been slept in, but everything else was exactly as it had been left. No trash, no mess. And on the bathroom counter, arranged in a precise line, were 6 prescription bottles. Not scattered carelessly, arranged like they were meant to be displayed. My housekeeper, a woman named Patricia, called me before touching anything. "Derek," she said, "I think something bad happened in here." I went to the room and saw immediately what she meant. The bottles were all the same medication, Ambien, a sleeping pill. 6 bottles, all prescribed to different names, all with different pharmacy labels, all dated within the past year. I called the police. What the police discovered when they analyzed the bottles was that they were legitimate prescriptions. But they didn't match any guest who checked in under the name the woman had provided. And when they checked the security footage from the parking lot, they saw her arrive, in a car, alone, and leave alone, carrying the same suitcase she'd arrived with. The police asked me to describe her. I did my best, but I realized I didn't remember details. She was just a woman, ordinary, forgettable. The officer seemed frustrated. "You're telling me you don't remember anything specific about her?" "She paid cash," I said. "She asked for a first-floor room away from the office. She was quiet." "Did she seem distressed, suicidal, in crisis?" "No," I said. "She seemed tired, like someone on a long drive." The police took the prescription bottles as evidence and filed a report. Nothing came of it. The bottles didn't match any missing persons reports, any prescriptions that had been reported stolen, or any indication of criminal activity beyond someone leaving medication in a motel room. It was odd, but it wasn't a crime. Then she came back. 3 weeks later, on a Friday night, a woman who matched the description checked in again. Same appearance, same age, same quiet demeanor. She asked for a first-floor room away from the office. She paid cash for 1 night. This time I was more attentive. I asked her name. She said Margaret Cole. I asked if she was visiting family. She said she was passing through. I asked where she was headed. She said south. Nothing helpful, nothing unusual. But I was watching. She took the key to room 14 and left. I told Patricia to keep an eye on that room, and when the woman left the next morning, Patricia checked it immediately. Again, the room was spotless. Again, there were prescription bottles arranged on the bathroom counter. This time, there were 8 bottles, different medications. Different names on the prescriptions. All legitimate. All within the past year. All arranged in a perfect line. I called the police again. The same officer came. His name was Detective Mitchell, and he stood in room 14, staring at the bottles with an expression I can only describe as recognition. Not surprise, recognition, like he'd been expecting this. "Tell me everything," he said to me. "Every detail you remember." I told him about her age, her clothing, her manner. I told him she'd been unremarkable. I told him she seemed tired but not distressed. The medication, Detective Mitchell said, holding up the bottles, different names on each one. Some of them are pretty strong pills. Someone could use these for a lot of things. Like what? I asked. Like knocking someone out without them knowing, he said. If you crush them in food or a drink, mix them properly, nobody would taste them in the right vehicle. Strong sedatives, pain medications, anti-anxiety drugs, the right combination, could render someone unconscious within 30 minutes. My stomach went cold. You think she's using the motel to... I couldn't finish the sentence. I think, Detective Mitchell said slowly, that she's testing something, or leaving us messages, or both. He took the bottles and left, promising he'd be in touch. He never called back. She came back again. Every 3 to 4 weeks, Margaret Cole would check in, spend one night, in a first-floor room away from the office, and leave the next morning. And every time she left prescription bottles arranged on the bathroom counter. After the 4th visit, I started documenting her arrivals, the dates, the room numbers, the specific medications she left behind. I kept records of the prescriptions, trying to see if there was a pattern. In the medications, the dosages, the names on the prescriptions, what I found was this: the medications were changing in a specific way. Each visit, she was leaving a different combination of drugs, and the combinations seemed designed to test something. What would happen if you combined a strong sleeping aid with a heart medication? What would happen if you mixed a painkiller with a muscle relaxant? What would happen if you combined an anti-anxiety drug with a hallucinogenic? It was like she was working through a formula, experimenting with different combinations, testing something systematically, and she was leaving the evidence behind in my motel. I brought my documentation to Detective Mitchell. I showed him the pattern, the progression, the clear systematic nature of the combinations. He listened carefully, then said something that disturbed me more than anything else. Have there been any deaths in your motel in the past year? Any guests who didn't check out? Any unexplained medical emergencies? I checked my records, and I found 3 incidents. 6 months earlier, a man had checked in and never checked out. The housekeeper found him in the room, dead of an apparent heart attack. He was a transient, no family that could be located. The death was ruled natural causes. 4 months earlier, a woman checked in, and her daughter arrived the next day looking for her. She wasn't in her room. She was found 3 blocks away, having been hit by a car. She survived, but with permanent brain damage. She couldn't remember where she'd been, what she'd done, or how she'd ended up on that street. 2 months earlier, a man checked in who was on medication for depression. He was found in his room, apparent suicide, pills and alcohol. The police didn't investigate because there was a clear motive and method. 3 incidents, all vague, all explainable, all happening in the months when Margaret Cole had been visiting. I think, Detective Mitchell said carefully, that we have a problem. What happened next was frustrating because it moved very slowly and then stopped entirely. Detective Mitchell brought in federal authorities. They analyzed the medications more carefully. They determined that the combinations Margaret was leaving behind would be lethal if administered properly to someone with certain heart conditions or medication sensitivities. But here's where it gets impossible. They couldn't find Margaret Cole. The name was fake. The driver's license she'd provided to check in was forged but professionally, good enough to pass casual inspection. The car she'd arrived in had been rented through a rental agency using a credit card that had been fraudulently obtained. The credit card had been used once and then never again. It was like she was a ghost. She appeared, left her messages in prescription bottles, and disappeared without a trace. Detective Mitchell believed, and I believed, that Margaret Cole was either a serial killer who was experimenting with poisons and drugging methods before committing actual murders, or she was someone involved in larger operation that specialized in making deaths look accidental. But without a real name, without a home address, without any way to identify her, there was nothing the police could do except watch my motel and wait for her to return. She never came back. Not after the federal authorities started monitoring the West Side. Not after her photo was circulated to law enforcement. She simply stopped coming. Either she'd been scared off by the police presence, or she'd completed whatever testing she'd been doing, or she'd moved her operation to a different motel in a different city. The West Side Budget Lodge is still operating. I still work here. though now I'm more aware of every guest, every transaction, every detail that might seem unusual. I think about Margaret Cole constantly. I think about that woman who checked in with the same quiet composure every time, who left her pharmaceutical puzzles on bathroom counters, who was systematically working through combinations of medications like someone perfecting a recipe. I think about the 3 people who died or were harmed while she was visiting. I think about how their deaths looked accidental, how they fit explanations, that nobody questioned, how they might have been part of her testing regimen. And I think about the fact that she's probably still doing it somewhere, still checking into motels, still leaving prescription bottles, still experimenting with how to make people die in ways that look natural or accidental. The federal investigation went cold after 6 months. Without an active crime or a suspect to pursue, they couldn't justify the resources. Detective Mitchell retired 2 years later, frustrated and unsatisfied. The case file went into an archive somewhere, probably still open, probably never to be solved. If you ever stay at a motel and you notice prescription bottles left in the room, don't touch them. Don't move them. Call the police immediately. It might be nothing. It might be a previous guest who forgot them. But it might be Margaret Cole, whoever she really is, conducting her experiments, perfecting her formulas, getting closer to whatever it is she's building toward. And if you check into a motel and you feel uncomfortable with how the staff is watching you, or if you notice someone paying too much attention to what room you're in, or if you find anything unusual in your space, trust that instinct. Leave, change motels, call someone, because there are people who use motels as laboratories, who check in and out, leaving clues and testing formulas, and nobody stops them because their activities exist in the gaps between what's legal and what's obviously criminal. Margaret Cole, if that was ever her real name, understood those gaps perfectly, and she exploited them completely. Story 3. My name is Derek Halverson, and I've managed the West Side Budget Lodge in Tulsa, Oklahoma for 11 years. The West Side isn't fancy. It's the kind of place where traveling salesmen sleep, where families with. Broken down cars wait for repairs, where people with nowhere else to go rent rooms by the week. We have 64 rooms, a parking lot that faces the street, and a reputation for asking no questions and providing clean sheets. I came to this job after leaving the construction industry. I needed something quieter, something where I could work steady without the physical strain getting to me. The night shift suited me. Fewer people to deal with, less drama, just me and whoever checked in between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. Most nights were routine. Check people in, answer the occasional question about restaurants or directions, make sure nobody's car got stolen from the parking lot. But in the fall of 2009, a woman checked in who changed everything. She arrived on a Tuesday evening, just after I came on shift. She was maybe 60 years old, thin, with gray hair pulled back in a bun. She wore a navy blue dress that looked expensive but well worn. She had one small suitcase and a purse. She paid cash for 2 nights, our standard rate, and asked for a room on the first floor, away from the office. I gave her room 18, at the far end of the western wing. She seemed unremarkable, quiet, polite, tired. She took the key without asking questions and left. Nothing about her suggested that she was anything but a regular guest. But the next morning, when our housekeeper went to clean the room, she'd only stayed 1 night instead of 2. The housekeeper found something that made her call me immediately. The room was spotless. The bed had been slept in, but everything else was exactly as it had been left. No trash, no mess. And on the bathroom counter, arranged in a precise line, were 6 prescription bottles. Not scattered carelessly, arranged like they were meant to be displayed. My housekeeper, a woman named Patricia, called me before touching anything. "Derek," she said, "I think something bad happened in here." I went to the room and saw immediately what she meant. The bottles were all the same medication, Ambien, a sleeping pill. 6 bottles, all prescribed to different names, all with different pharmacy labels, all dated within the past year. I called the police. What the police discovered when they analyzed the bottles was that they were legitimate prescriptions, but they didn't match any guest who checked in under the name the woman had provided. And when they checked the security footage from the parking lot, they saw her arrive in a car, alone, and leave alone, carrying the same suitcase she'd arrived with. The police asked me to describe her. I did my best, but I realized I didn't remember details. She was just a woman, ordinary, forgettable. The officer seemed frustrated. "You're telling me you don't remember anything specific about her?" "She paid cash," I said. She asked for a first-floor room away from the office. She was quiet. Did she seem distressed, suicidal, in crisis? No, I said. She seemed tired, like someone on a long drive. The police took the prescription bottles as evidence and filed a report. Nothing came of it. The bottles didn't match any missing persons reports, any prescriptions that had been reported stolen, or any indication of criminal activity beyond someone leaving medication in a motel room. It was odd, but it wasn't a crime. Then she came back. 3 weeks later, on a Friday night, a woman who matched the description checked in again. Same appearance, same age, same quiet demeanor. She asked for a first-floor room away from the office. She paid cash for one night. This time I was more attentive. I asked her name. She said Margaret Cole. I asked if she was visiting family. She said she was passing through. I asked where she was headed. She said south. Nothing helpful, nothing unusual. But I was watching. She took the key to room 14 and left. I told Patricia to keep an eye on that room, and when the woman left the next morning, Patricia checked it immediately. Again, the room was spotless. Again, there were prescription bottles arranged on the bathroom counter. This time, there were 8 bottles, different medications, different names on the prescriptions, all legitimate, all within the past year, all arranged in a perfect line. I called the police again. The same officer came. His name was Detective Mitchell, and he stood in room 14, staring at the bottles with an expression I can only describe as recognition. Not surprise, recognition, like he'd been expecting this. "Tell me everything," he said to me. "Every detail you remember." I told him about her age, her clothing, her manner. I told him she'd been unremarkable. I told him she seemed tired but not distressed. "The medication," Detective Mitchell said, holding up the bottles, different names on each one. "Some of them are pretty strong pills. Someone could use these for a lot of things." "Like what?" I asked. "Like knocking someone out without them knowing," he said. "If you crush them in food or a drink, mix them properly, nobody would taste them in the right vehicle. Strong sedatives, pain medications, anti-anxiety drugs, the right combination, could render someone unconscious within 30 minutes. My stomach went cold. "You think she's using the motel to—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "I think," Detective Mitchell said slowly, "that she's testing something, or leaving us messages, or both." He took the bottles and left, promising he'd be in touch. He never called back. She came back again. Every 3 to 4 weeks, Margaret Cole would check in, spend one night, in a first-floor room away from the office, and leave the next morning. And every time she left prescription bottles arranged on the bathroom counter. After the 4th visit, I started documenting her arrivals, the dates, the room numbers, the specific medications she left behind. I kept records of the prescriptions, trying to see if there was a pattern. In the medications, the dosages, the names on the prescriptions, what I found was this: the medications were changing in a specific way. Each visit, she was leaving a different combination of drugs, and the combinations seemed designed to test something. What would happen if you combined a strong sleeping aid with a heart medication? What would happen if you mixed a painkiller with a muscle relaxant? What would happen if you combined an anti-anxiety drug with a hallucinogenic? It was like she was working through a formula, experimenting with different combinations, testing something systematically, and she was leaving the evidence behind in my motel. I brought my documentation to Detective Mitchell. I showed him the pattern, the progression, the clear systematic nature of the combinations. He listened carefully, then said something that disturbed me more than anything else. "Have there been any deaths in your motel in the past year? Any guests who didn't check out? Any unexplained medical emergencies?" I checked my records, and I found 3 incidents. 6 months earlier, a man had checked in and never checked out. The housekeeper found him in the room, dead of an apparent heart attack. He was a transient, no family that could be located. The death was ruled natural causes. 4 months earlier, a woman checked in, and her daughter arrived the next day looking for her. She wasn't in her room. She was found 3 blocks away, having been hit by a car. She survived, but with permanent brain damage. She couldn't remember where she'd been, what she'd done, or how she'd ended up on that street. 2 months earlier, a man checked in who was on medication for depression. He was found in his room, apparent suicide, pills and alcohol. The police didn't investigate because there was a clear motive and method. 3 incidents, all vague, all explainable, all happening in the months when Margaret Cole had been visiting. I think, Detective Mitchell said carefully, "that we have a problem." What happened next was frustrating because it moved very slowly and then stopped entirely. Detective Mitchell brought in federal authorities. They analyzed the medications more carefully. They determined that the combinations Margaret was leaving behind would be lethal if administered properly to someone with certain heart conditions or medication sensitivities. But here's where it gets impossible. They couldn't find Margaret Cole. The name was fake. The driver's license she'd provided to check in was forged but professionally, good enough to pass casual inspection. The car she'd arrived in had been rented through a rental agency using a credit card that had been fraudulently obtained. The credit card had been used once and then never again. It was like she was a ghost. She appeared, left her messages in prescription bottles, and disappeared without a trace. Detective Mitchell believed, and I believed, that Margaret Cole was either a serial killer who was experimenting with poisons and drugging methods before committing actual murders, or she was someone involved in larger operation that specialized in making deaths look accidental. But without a real name, without a home address, without any way to identify her, there was nothing the police could do except watch my motel and wait for her to return. She never came back. Not after the federal authorities started monitoring the West Side. Not after her photo was circulated to law enforcement. She simply stopped coming. Either she'd been scared off by the police presence, or she'd completed whatever testing she'd been doing, or she'd moved her operation to a different motel in a different city. The West Side Budget Lodge is still operating. I still work here, though now I'm more aware of every guest, every transaction, every detail that might seem unusual. I think about Margaret Cole constantly. I think about that woman who checked in with the same quiet composure every time, who left her pharmaceutical puzzles on bathroom counters, who was systematically working through combinations of medications like someone perfecting a recipe. I think about the 3 people who died or were harmed while she was visiting. I think about how their deaths looked accidental, how they fit explanations, that nobody questioned, how they might have been part of her testing regimen. And I think about the fact that she's probably still doing it somewhere, still checking into motels, still leaving prescription bottles, still experimenting with how to make people die in ways that look natural or accidental. The federal investigation went cold after 6 months. Without an active crime or a suspect to pursue, they couldn't justify the resources. Detective Mitchell retired 2 years later, frustrated and unsatisfied. The case file went into an archive somewhere, probably still open, probably never to be solved. If you ever stay at a motel and you notice prescription bottles left in the room, don't touch them. Don't move them. Call the police immediately. It might be nothing. It might be a previous guest who forgot them. But it might be Margaret Cole, whoever she really is, conducting her experiments, perfecting her formulas, getting closer to whatever it is she's building toward. And if you check into a motel and you feel uncomfortable with how the staff is watching you, or if you notice someone paying too much attention to what room you're in, or if you find anything unusual in your space, trust that instinct. Leave, change motels, call someone, because there are people who use motels as laboratories, who check in and out, leaving clues and testing formulas, and nobody stops them because their activities exist in the gaps between what's legal and what's obviously criminal. Margaret Cole, if that was ever her real name, understood those gaps perfectly, and she exploited them completely. My name is Vincent Cartwright, and I've worked the front desk at the Riverside Motor Inn in Memphis, Tennessee, for 9 years. The Riverside is the kind of place that doesn't advertise. It sits on a side street off Elvis Presley Boulevard, near the river, in a neighborhood that's seen better decades. We have 42 rooms, a small office, and a clientele that mostly consists of people passing through, people in transition, people who need a place to sleep without questions. I took the job because I'd burned out from retail management. I needed something simpler, something with a predictable schedule and minimal interpersonal complexity. The night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., suited me perfectly. Most people who checked in after dark didn't want to talk. They wanted their key and their privacy. For 8 years, the job was exactly what I needed. Then in the spring of 2017, a man checked in who made me understand that some people use motels for purposes that go far beyond sleep. He arrived on a Wednesday night around 11 p.m. He was in his mid-30s, wearing a suit that was slightly too large, carrying a leather briefcase. He had the bearing of someone who'd done this exact thing many times before. He came to the desk, asked for a room without being, offered options, paid cash without negotiating the rate, and asked for a quiet location where he wouldn't be disturbed. I gave him room 27 on the second floor at the far end of the hallway. It was the most isolated room we had. He took the key and left without another word. The next morning, he checked out before 6 a.m. He left the key on the desk without stopping to talk to anyone. The room was spotless. The housekeeper reported that the bed hadn't been slept in. There was no trash. Nothing suggested that anyone had occupied the space. But something had happened in that room. The housekeeper, a woman named Rosa, came to me with a concern. She said the room felt wrong. The air was stale, like something had been sealed in there overnight. And there was a faint smell, chemical, artificial, like cleaning products or something similar. Probably just someone who's a heavy smoker, I said, though we had a no-smoking policy. No, Rosa said. It's not that. It's something else. Something deliberate. I checked the room myself. Rosa was right. The air felt heavy, and underneath the smell of industrial cleaner, there was something else, something organic and faint, like sweat or bodily fluid. But the room was clean. The sheets were unchanged. There was no visible evidence of anything inappropriate. I made a note in the system and moved on. He came back 2 weeks later. Same appearance, same suit, same briefcase, same request for a quiet room. This time I gave him room 31 on the second floor, different hallway. Again, he checked out early the next morning. Again, the room was spotless. Again, Rosa reported that something about the room felt wrong. This time I asked her to be more specific. It's like someone was sick in there, Rosa said. Not vomit, but something intimate. Something that left a mark even though there's no visible mark. I didn't know what she meant, but I knew she was right that something was off. He came back 3 more times over the next 6 weeks, always the same pattern, always a different room, always early. Check out, always the mysterious smell that suggested something had happened, despite the absence of evidence. I started documenting his visits, the dates, the times, the specific rooms. I watched the security footage of him entering and leaving, always alone, always, carrying the briefcase, always moving with the same deliberate efficiency. On his 5th visit, I decided to check the room while he was still in it. I told Rosa I was going to do a maintenance check on the second floor. I had a master key. I waited until around 2 a.m., when the building would be quiet and most guests would be asleep. I approached room 33, where he was staying that night, carefully. I could hear sound from inside, faint, rhythmic, like something mechanical running. I used my master key and opened the door quietly. What I saw in that moment is burned into my memory with perfect clarity, and I've never been able to fully explain it to anyone because the explanation doesn't match the reality of what I witnessed. The man was standing in the middle of the room, facing the window. He was completely still. In front of him, suspended somehow, I couldn't see wires or support structures, was a figure. A human-shaped form, made of something that looked like smoke or vapor or light. The figure was translucent, barely visible, but definitely there. The man had his hands raised, palms up, and he was whispering something I couldn't hear. The figure in front of him was moving slightly, oscillating, like it was trying to move away from him and couldn't. I froze. I didn't have time to process what I was seeing because the man slowly turned his head toward the door. He looked directly at me, and then everything went dark. I woke up in my bed at home. It was morning. I'd missed my entire shift and my following day. My phone had 17 missed calls from the riverside asking where I was. I went to the hospital immediately. They ran tests, blood work, neurological exams, everything they could think of. They found nothing wrong with me physically. I hadn't been drugged. I hadn't suffered a stroke or seizure. Neurologically and medically I was fine. But I had no memory of how I'd gotten home. No memory of leaving the motel. No memory of the night in between. When I finally went back to work, 3 days later, I checked the security footage for the night I'd gone into room 33. The footage showed me entering the room at 2:47 a.m. It showed me standing in the doorway for approximately 40 seconds, and then it showed me leaving at 2:48 a.m. But I had no memory of those 40 seconds, and the loss felt complete, not like forgetting, a detail, but like those 40 seconds had been removed from my consciousness entirely. I asked about the guest. He checked out the next morning as always, paid cash as always, left no forwarding information. But this time, he'd left something behind. Rosa found it when she cleaned the room. a leather journal on top of the dresser, positioned deliberately so it would be found. I opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting, precise, clinical, almost architectural. The entries went back years, to other motels, other cities. The journal documented encounters. Not sexual encounters. Something else. Something that didn't have a name that I understood. The most recent entries were about me, about the visit I'd made to room 33, about how I'd seen something I wasn't meant to see, about how my mind had been adjusted to accommodate the experience without retaining the traumatic memory. And underneath all of that, written in increasingly frantic handwriting, they're getting closer, they're starting to remember. The barrier is thinning. Soon they'll be able to perceive directly, without mediation, without the adjustment. And then what happens when the world understands that we exist in the spaces between? When people realize that motels are just meeting places? That hotels and temporary spaces are where the translation happens most easily? The final entry dated the day he checked out. I'm moving to Atlanta. The work there is progressing faster. More transient populations, more people who won't be missed if the transition goes wrong. More opportunities to test the boundaries. The Memphis location is compromised now. Someone saw, someone knows, but they've been adjusted. They won't remember. And even if they do, who will believe them? I reported everything to the police. They listened politely and then did nothing, without a suspect, without a clear crime, without any evidence beyond a cryptic journal that could be interpreted. As creative writing or the work of someone with a mental illness, there was nothing actionable. I hired a private investigator to track the man. The investigator traced the cash transactions, the motel stays, the pattern across multiple states, but every trail went cold. The man existed in the gaps. He paid cash, he used different names, he left no digital footprint. The investigator eventually told me something I didn't want to hear, I think. He's real, and I think you actually did see something in that room. But I also think there's nothing we can prove and no one we can arrest. He's going to keep doing whatever it is he does, and we're not going to stop him. I still work at the Riverside. I've never been able to leave, and I'm not entirely sure why. Part of me wants to understand what I saw. Part of me is afraid that if I leave, I'll lose the only thread connecting me to the reality of what happened. I monitor the guest log obsessively. I've set up additional cameras in the hallways. I watch for anyone who matches his description or who exhibits his pattern. Solitary stays, early checkout, unusual requests for isolated rooms. I've found 3 other men who fit the profile. I've documented their stays. I've tried to follow them, but they always disappear from surveillance footage in impossible ways. They enter a room and don't leave, yet the room is empty when security checks it. They arrive in a car, but the car is never parked in our lot when they leave. The journal I found is locked in a safe at my house. I've read it hundreds of times, trying to understand what adjustment means, what translation refers to, what entity or entities the writer is claiming exist in the spaces between. Rosa quit 2 years after the initial incident. She said the motel was wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. She moved to another state and never came back. The Riverside is still operating. Most nights are routine, but periodically men matching the profile check in, and I watch them, with a mixture of fear and desperate curiosity, trying to understand what they're doing in my motel, what they're accessing, what they're moving between the waking world and something else. If you ever stay at a motel and you experience missing time, a gap in your memory, a period you can't account for, don't dismiss it. Don't accept the explanation that you fell asleep or got drunk. Because missing time might mean something accessed you, something studied you, something made a deliberate decision about whether you should remember or forget. And if you're ever alone in a motel room late at night and you see something that shouldn't exist, something translucent, something in the space between visible and invisible, don't investigate. Don't try to understand it, just leave. Because there are people using motels as laboratories for things that exist at the intersection of consciousness and something we don't have language for. And they're perfecting their techniques every time someone checks in and checks out. The man from that night in 2017 has never returned to the Riverside. But I know he's still out there, still doing his work, still moving through motel rooms in cities across America. And I know that what I saw in room 33 was real, even though my mind has been adjusted to doubt that reality constantly. That doubt is probably part of the design. Story 4. My name is Calvin Mercer, and for the last 10 years I've worked night audit at the Skyway. Suites, a mid-range airport hotel tucked behind Terminal C of a major hub on the East Coast. If You've ever flown through here on a red-eye and missed your connection, there's a good chance you've walked through our automatic doors half asleep, dragging your carry-on, just wanting a bed and a wake-up call. That's what most people are to me. Boarding passes and last names, loyalty numbers and room keys. The hotel is designed for forgetting. Rooms look the same, hallways look the same, nights bleed into each other. People check in, they sleep, they shower, they vanish back into the terminal and out into the world. No one expects the Skyway Suites to be memorable. In 2022, for about 6 weeks, it became the only place I can't stop remembering. It started with a woman on a missed connection. She came in just before midnight, after a thunderstorm shut down half the outbound flights. We had a line of angry, exhausted people from the airline voucher desk. She caught my eye because she wasn't angry or exhausted. She was, too, composed. Mid-30s, business attire, wheeled carry-on, thin laptop bag. Her hair was pulled into a tight French twist that hadn't come loose in the chaos of the airport. Her eyes were alert in a way that didn't fit the rest of the crowd. When she got to the desk, she already had her ID and credit card in hand. "Reservation?" I asked, launching into the script. "I'm with Lanyard Air," she said. "The crew block. Flight 308 from Houston. We were all rebooked tomorrow. They told us to come straight here. We have airline contracts. Crews stay with us constantly." I checked the screen. We had no Lanyard Air crew due in that night. "Maybe under your name," I offered. She gave it. Dana Field. Nothing on file. No crew block, no individual booking. "Looks like the airline didn't push it through yet," I said. "I can still get you a room at the distress rate. You'll just have to settle reimbursement with them later." She smiled faintly, like she'd expected that answer. "That's fine. One night. High floor if you can. Away from elevators." I gave her 1214, top floor, far end of the hallway. She took the key card, glanced at the number, and looked directly at me for a moment longer than people usually do. "You work overnight, right?" she asked. "Yeah. How many nights a week?" "5. She nodded, like she just confirmed something on a checklist. "Quiet shift?" "Mostly," I said. "Just stranded passengers." "Right," she said. "Stranded passengers." She took her key and left. There was nothing obviously wrong about her. Nothing I could point to. Just a prickle on the back of my neck that didn't go away for the rest of the night. The first thing that really bothered me happened a week later. Another thunderstorm. Another line of tired people. Another woman approached the desk. Older, maybe late 50s, with a rolling suitcase, and the shell-shocked expression of someone who's been awake too long. "I'm with Lanyard Air," she said. "Crew block. Flight 308 from Houston." "They said..." I stopped her. "Sorry, we don't have a Lanyard crew block tonight." Her face crumpled. The gate agent said, "I know what they said," I said. "They mix us up with the hotel across the highway sometimes. Let me see what I can do." I found her a room. She took it gratefully, hands shaking. Her name was not Dana, but the phrasing had been identical. Same flight number, same airline, same script. I chalked it up to coincidence. Airlines reuse flight numbers. Crews share information. Scripts exist for a reason. 2 nights later, a man in his 20s came in at 2 a.m. "I'm with Lanyard Air. Crew block. Flight 308 from Houston." That was the 3rd time in 10 days. We did not have any Lanyard crews scheduled in that entire period. The first time I called airport ops about it, the woman on the other end of the line sounded bored. "Lanyard Air 308 from Houston? That's a morning inbound," she said. "It lands at 10:15 a.m. It's a daily, unless it's canceled." "Why?" "I've had 3 people in the last week claim to be on that crew at night needing rooms," I said. "They're not on any list. They're not wearing IDs. They all say the same line. Probably just confused passengers," Oppies said. "People mishear flight numbers all the time. As long as you're checking ID and credit cards, we don't care where they say they're from." "Right," I said. "Thanks." I hung up and pulled the registration cards. All 3 had listed different addresses in different cities. All 3 had used different credit cards. All 3 had stayed one night, alone, checking in between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., and checking out before dawn. The only thing they had in common was that line, "I'm with Lanyard Air. Crew block. Flight 308 from Houston." And the room preferences. All of them had asked specifically for high floors, far from elevators. The first incident report came 2 weeks after I'd checked in. Dana. I came in at 10 p.m., as usual. The evening shift clerk, Marisol, was pale and jumpy. "You heard about 1510? she asked as soon as I walked in. No, I said, putting my bag down. What happened? Guest walked into the lobby around 7 p.m., covered in blood, she said, his own, arms shredded, clothes shredded. He came down in the elevator barefoot. We thought he'd been attacked in his room. Was he? She shook her head. Security went up. Room was clean, no blood, no broken glass, nothing but his arms. She mimed vertical lines. Looked like he'd run them through a shredder. What did he say? I asked. That he'd woken up in the service hallway, she said. The one behind 15. He said he couldn't remember how he got there. Said something about lights and a door that shouldn't have been there. Then he passed out. Where is he now? Hospital, she said. GM went with him, did the incident report. But the cameras, she stopped. What about the cameras? I asked. They didn't show him leave his room, she said. He went in at 1:30 a.m., alone. Never came out. But he woke up in the service hallway at 6, bleeding like he'd been dragged over concrete. Maybe a blind spot in the camera coverage, I said. Calvin, she said. There's no blind spot in that hallway. We checked when they installed them. There's nowhere to go. 1510 had checked in with the phrase, I'm with Lanyard Air. Crew block. Flight 308 from Houston. We did what hotels do. We cleaned the blood. We filled out forms, we called. Insurance, we moved guests away from the 15th floor for maintenance. I started paying more attention. The Skyway Suites has 16 floors. Floors 3 through 12 are standard guest rooms. 13 through 16 are premium. Nicer linens, slightly bigger rooms. Airline crews sometimes. Elite frequent flyers when the airline pays extra. 15, where the incident happened, is one of those. Behind each guest room hallway there's a service corridor. Maintenance uses it. Housekeeping carts roll through. It runs parallel to the guest corridor with fire doors every so often. Guests aren't supposed to access those hallways. The man from 1510 had woken up in the service hall between 1510 and 1512 with injuries that didn't match any surface in that space. No protruding nails, no exposed metal, just smooth concrete and painted drywall. Security reviewed footage from every angle. At 1:29 a.m., the guest got off the elevator on 15 and walked toward his room. At 1:31, his keycard opened 1510. He went inside. The door closed. No one else went in or out. No one came down the hallway. No one opened the service door. At 6:02 a.m., the service door camera on the other side caught motion. The door opened from the inside. The guest stumbled out, bleeding, disoriented, and walked toward the elevator. There is no camera inside the service hallway itself. We chalked it up as unexplained injury, guest claims amnesia, possible sleepwalking episode, on paper. Off paper, among the staff, we called it the first one. The second one happened 4 nights later. Different floor, 13 this time. Different guest, different airline voucher. Same pattern. Woman in her 40s, traveling alone, missed her connection from Chicago. She checked in with the airline script, no mention of being crew. Asked for a high floor, away from elevators. I gave her 1318. At 3:15 a.m., the fire panel at the desk chimed. Door ajar, service access 13 billions. That happens sometimes if housekeeping forgets to close it properly, or maintenance props it for a bit. But at 3 in the morning, no one's supposed to be back there. I picked up the house phone and called security. You see anyone on 13? I asked. Checking now, the guard said. I watched the cameras. Guest hallway on 13, empty. Elevators, empty. Stairwells, empty. Then the service door opened. For a second, there was just darkness beyond. Then 1318 stumbled out, barefoot. Her hotel t-shirt soaked at the front. She looked like she'd been standing under a shower of blood. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't even crying. She was moving like a wind-up toy whose mechanism had been damaged. Security reached her at the elevator bank. She collapsed. She survived, barely. Deep cuts across her arms and torso, some on her legs, no defensive wounds. The doctors said it was like she'd been pressed repeatedly against something sharp but not clean, like old rusted wire. But there is no wire in that service corridor, no broken shelving, no exposed hardware, and, once again, camera footage showed her going into her room alone hours earlier and never coming back out. We closed 13 and 15 for renovation after that. Moved all remaining guests, stopped selling those floors. Corporate sent an investigator. He walked around for 2 days, took notes and left. The official line was that we were dealing with structural issues in the Service corridors, unidentified hazards that might be injuring guests. Maintenance tore down some drywall. They found nothing behind it except more wall. Meanwhile, a pattern crystallized in my mind that I didn't want to see. Every guest who'd had an episode had checked in within a 2-hour window after a certain kind of arrival, a flight irregularity, a storm backup, some disruption that flooded us with stranded passengers. Every one of them had asked for a high floor away from the elevators, and every one of them had used the same phrase at the desk at least once, buried in their rambling. About cancellations and rebookings and lost luggage, I'm basically stranded here. Not I'm stuck or I'm delayed or I'm overnighted. I'm stranded, like it was a keyword. The third one made the news, briefly. We had a mechanical issue at the airport, something with de-icing equipment that grounded a whole bank of late-night departures. The airlines rolled out their cots and vouchers, and we hit capacity by midnight. One of the last guests to check in was a man in his early 20s, hoodie, backpack, one small roller bag. He looked like any other college kid traveling alone. "I'm stranded here," he said without prompting when he reached the desk. "They said I have to fly out tomorrow." I remember that my hand hesitated for a second over the keyboard. "Preference?" I asked. "High floor," he said. "As high as you've got. I like being above things." I could have given him 6 or 7, but his desire to be high up felt genuine, not scripted. I gave him 1609. At 4:07 a.m., every alarm in the hotel went off. Not the fire alarm, the elevator alarms. All 6 elevator banks chimed simultaneously. On my monitor, every car had gone into independent service mode, cycling between 16 and the lobby without stopping, as if someone had sent a command through a maintenance panel. Security and engineering both rushed to their stations. The chief engineer grabbed the control board in the back office, trying to override whatever was happening. "It's not taking commands," he said. "It's like someone else has control of the system." The camera showed the doors opening on 16. No one in sight. Closing, descending, opening in the lobby, empty, up and down, a grotesque pendulum. We shut power to the elevators at the breaker. That stopped the movement. 5 minutes later, the phone at the desk rang. It was a guest on 16. "Something's wrong," he whispered. "In the hallway, outside my room." I pulled up the 16 hallway camera. For a long second, the grainy feed showed nothing but patterned carpet and beige walls. Then the service door at the far end opened, slowly. Something like a shadow crossed the threshold. Not a person, a distortion. The hallway lights flickered as it passed each fixture one by one, drawing closer to the camera. All the hair on my arms stood up. My body reacted before my brain could make sense of what I was seeing. The line went dead. The camera cut out. When engineering restored power and security went up, they found 1609 lying half in, half out of the service hallway. No visible injuries, vitals present but weak. They called EMS. The paramedics worked on him in the hallway for 15 minutes. He never woke up. At the hospital, he flatlined twice. They got him back both times. He remained comatose for 3 days, then woke up and began screaming. He screamed for 9 straight minutes, they told us later, before they could sedate him. He wouldn't talk about what he'd seen, wouldn't say what had happened. All he would say over and over was, "It's not a hallway. It's not a hallway. It's a ramp." To where he couldn't or wouldn't say. Airport hotels live and die on reputation. We can absorb a bedbug review. We can't absorb people disappear in your service corridors. Corporates slapped NDAs on everyone. Guests involved were comped, their medical bills quietly handled, their stories buried under stacks of legal paperwork. Internally, they brought in a consultant, not the usual safety guy, someone different, suit too sharp, questions too broad. He asked for historical records of unusual incidents, faints, panic attacks, missing time, unexplained injuries, complaints about weird hallways. Going back 20 years, what he found and what he showed a small group of us in a closed-door meeting at 3 in the morning. Changed the way I look at every anonymous hotel tower you've ever seen from a taxi window. Incidents like ours. People found injured near service corridors, guests reporting extra doors. Staff experiencing lost time, clustered around 3 floors, 13, 15, and 16. Always on nights when airport operations were heavily disrupted. A large number of passengers used the word stranded at check-in. High-floor rooms away from elevators were requested more than average. And most disturbingly, those nights correlated almost perfectly with spikes in unaccompanied bag, incidents in the terminal, bags that made it onto flights without confirmed passengers attached. Bags that cleared security, even though their owners never scanned boarding passes. Someone, the consultant said or something, is using your building to move things, and maybe people, off the manifest. I thought that was insane. Then he played a clip. Security footage from 2010. Old resolution, timestamp fuzzed. A man in a pilot uniform, no airline logo, getting off the elevator on 15. Walking to the service door, entering without a key card, the door closing. 3 minutes later, the same man, same uniform, same stride, appearing on the camera of a different hallway entirely. Stepping out of a service door on 3, except the doors on 3 and 15 aren't connected. They're separated by 2 locked maintenance spaces and a vertical gap in the plans where no corridor exists. The architecture on paper is one thing, the consultant said. The architecture that emerges in a place like this, with thousands of transient souls passing through every night, is something else. He looked tired when he said it, tired and certain. We're going to close 15 and 16 permanently, he said. You tell the public is for renovations. You'll rotate housekeeping staff so the same people aren't exposed too long to those corridors. And you, he looked at me, stop giving high floors to people who ask for them in certain ways. In what ways? I asked. You'll know, he said. They locked 15 and 16, bolted the stairwell doors, killed the elevator access. On paper, they became mechanical floors. 13 stayed open, but we never used the rooms nearest the service doors. Out of order became the permanent status. Life at the Skyway Suites went back to normal, at least on the surface. Stranded passengers still came. Airline vouchers still printed. People still stumbled in at midnight, angry and exhausted and grateful for a bed. I kept working nights. I kept listening, and I started to hear it. The difference between someone saying, I'm stuck here tonight, and someone saying, I'm stranded. The ones who said stranded always had a slightly different look. Less annoyance, more detachment, like they were already one step out of their own lives, like they'd been cut loose. Maybe you'd never notice it if you weren't listening for it. I was. When those people asked for high floors away from the elevators, I put them on 5 or 6, close enough that whatever lives in the vertical spaces of this building couldn't get enough leverage. I don't know if that actually does anything, but since 2017, we haven't had another guest wake up shredded in a service hall. We still get reports, though. Flight attendants saying they feel pulled toward the locked stairwell to 15 when they stay on 12. A pilot who swore there was a door across from his room one night that wasn't there in the morning. A housekeeper who quit after opening a service door on 13 and seeing a corridor that didn't match the building's dimensions. Too long, she said, much too long. I've come to believe that airport hotels are more than just boxes with beds. They're pressure valves. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of people pour through them every night, all of them in between. Between cities, between lives, between decisions, not home yet, not where they're going, suspended. All that in-betweenness has to go somewhere. If you ever find yourself checking into an airport hotel after a canceled flight, pay attention to the words that come out of your mouth at the desk. If you hear yourself say stranded without quite knowing why, ask for a room on a low floor, near the elevator, near other people. Take whatever they give you that keeps you close to the herd. And if you wake in the night to the sound of a door opening in the wall, behind your bed, metal on metal, slow and careful, do not go investigate. Do not follow strange carpet patterns or unfamiliar exit signs. Stay in your room, turn on every light, wait for dawn, because some doors in these buildings don't lead to other parts of the hotel. They lead out of the manifest entirely. Story 5. My name is Preston Caldwell, and I've owned and managed the Neon Palms Motor Lodge in Las Vegas for 13 years. The Neon Palms isn't on the Strip. It's off Boulder Highway, in the part of Vegas that tourists don't photograph, where people come when they can't afford or don't want the big casinos. We rent by the night, by the week, sometimes by the month. We have 40 rooms, a parking lot that faces the street, and a clientele that asks no questions and expects the same courtesy in return. I came into this business after my construction company went under during the 2008 recession. I needed work, and a motel owner I knew was liquidating. I bought the Neon Palms cheap and poured everything into keeping it operational. 13 years later, it still runs. Not glamorous, not profitable enough to expand, but steady. The night clerk position has always been difficult to fill. Late hours, minimum wage, dealing with drunks and addicts and people at their lowest points. I've hired dozens of people over the years. Most quit within a month. In the summer of 2019, a woman named Claire applied for the position. She was in her early 40s with tired eyes and the kind of steady presence that comes from living through hard things without complaining about them. She'd worked night security at 3 different casinos. She wanted less chaotic work. The neon palms seemed right to her. I hired her immediately. For 6 months, Claire was the best night clerk I'd ever employed. She checked people in, handled complaints, called maintenance when needed. She was polite but firm. She didn't tolerate nonsense. The guests respected her. I respected her. Then, in January 2020, she started doing something that made me understand that some people use motels for purposes far darker than I'd ever considered. It started with a room number. Claire came to me on a Tuesday morning, end of her shift, and said, "I need to talk to you about room 12. What about it?" I asked. "I need you to stop renting it," she said, immediately. No exceptions. "Why?" I asked. "Because something's wrong with it," she said. "I can't explain it in a way that makes sense, but people who stay in that room don't leave the same way they arrived." I'd heard vague complaints about various rooms over the years. The noise from the highway, the air conditioning, minor wear and tear, but never anything like what Claire was describing. "Be specific," I said. Claire chose her words carefully. "In the past month, we've had 5 guests in room 12. 3 of them checked out normally. 2 of them." She paused. 2 of them were found in the room, unresponsive. Both had to be hospitalized. Both claimed they didn't remember how they got there. Both said they'd gone to sleep and then woken up to someone standing over them. I checked my incident logs. She was right. 2 guests, 2 weeks apart. Both found unresponsive in room 12. Both transported to the hospital with no clear cause of injury or illness. "Why didn't you tell me about this when it happened?" I asked. "Because I wanted to be sure it was the room," Claire said. "Because I needed to observe the pattern." "And now you're sure?" "I'm certain," she said. "Lock the room. Don't rent it. Something lives in there." I didn't believe her, but I locked room 12 anyway, chalking it up to coincidence and her stress from the job. Then, 2 nights later, a guest in room 11 called the desk at 3 a.m., hysterical. "There's someone in here," she screamed. "There's someone in my room. Call the police. Call the police now." I woke up immediately. I live in a small apartment attached to the office and grabbed the emergency keys. Security should have been there, but we didn't have 24-hour security. Too expensive. It was just me and Claire, and whatever happened, we got to room 11 to find the guest barricaded against the inside of the door, shaking, pointing at the wall that separated room 11 from room 12. "There," she whispered. "That wall. There's someone on the other side. Someone in the wall. I could see them moving. I could hear them breathing." Claire and I looked at the wall. It was solid drywall, painted beige, nothing visible. But the guest was convinced she'd seen movement, a shape, something pressing against the inside of the wall. I called the police. They came, checked the rooms, found nothing. The guest was treated for shock and offered to stay in a different room. She refused and checked out. But here's what bothered me. Her keycard data showed she'd only opened her door twice that night, once to enter, once when she opened it to call for help. She hadn't been awake. She'd been sleeping and something had woken her, something she'd perceived as a presence in the wall. I asked Claire to document everything going forward. What she presented me with after 3 weeks was a detailed log spanning 6 months, going back before she'd even started working for me, guest arrivals and checkout times, room numbers, notes about behavior changes, guests who'd checked in alone and checked out with vacant expressions, guests who'd been found in hallways with no memory of how they got there, guests who'd reported feeling watched while in their rooms. And all of it, without exception, involved rooms adjacent to room 12, room 11, room 13, the room directly above 212, the room directly below 12 on the ground floor. "It's spreading," Claire said. "Whatever's in 12 is spreading outward, touching the rooms around it, infecting them." "That's insane," I said. "I know," she said. "But you're the owner. You have to decide if you're going to ignore it or deal with it." I brought in a contractor to inspect room 12 physically. I told him there might be structural issues, pest problems, something in the walls or plumbing. He spent 3 hours in the room and found absolutely nothing. The plumbing was fine, no signs of pests, no evidence of mold or water damage. The room was, structurally and mechanically, one of the best maintained rooms in the motel. But when he came out, the contractor looked pale. "I don't know what it is," he said, "but something's wrong with that room. The air feels wrong. The light feels wrong. I can't explain it, but I didn't want to be in there." I locked room 12 permanently. I also locked 11, 13, and 212, the surrounding rooms. On paper, they were undergoing renovation. In reality, they sat empty. That cut our occupancy by 12%. Guests started asking why so many rooms were unavailable. Word got around the Vegas hotel community that the Neon Palms was having issues. Our reputation took a hit, but the incidents stopped. For 2 months, nothing happened. No unresponsive guests, no people with missing time, no reports of presences in walls. Then, in April 2020, a new guest checked in to room 15, one of the few remaining occupied rooms, and that night he started screaming. Not pain screams, terror screams. Primal animal sounds that went on for 40 minutes, until Claire could calm him down enough to talk. "There's a door," he kept saying, in the wall between my room and the next room. I saw it. I saw the handle. I tried to open it, but my hand went through it. My hand went through the wall. Room 15 is adjacent to room 14, which is across the hallway from room 12. I met with Claire to discuss closing the entire east wing. "It's not just 12, she said. "It's growing. The contamination is spreading through the building. Every adjacent room becomes vulnerable. Eventually, it reaches all the rooms." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "Contamination? It's a room. It's an inanimate object, is it?" Claire asked. "I've been researching. I've been reading about places like this, buildings where something exists that doesn't have a name, where reality gets thin. Motels especially, because of the constant turnover, the anonymity, the constant in and out of transient consciousness." "You sound insane," I said. "I know," she said, "but you've seen it. You've documented it. You know something is happening in your building that doesn't match normal reality." I did know. That was the problem. I closed the entire east wing, 14 rooms. Our occupancy dropped another 30%. I started losing money, but the incidents continued. Now they were happening on the west side. Room 35 had a guest who was found wandering in the parking lot at dawn with no memory of leaving his room. Room 38 had a guest who reported seeing movement in the mirror while showering. Not her reflection, but something else, something watching her from behind the glass. And one night, Claire came to me with a discovery. She'd examined the building's original blueprints from 1978, when the Neon Palms was first constructed. Comparing them to the current layout, she found something odd. Room 12 didn't exist on the original blueprints. The original plan showed the space as part of a larger room, room 12 to 13, a single unit. At some point, the previous owner had installed a wall to divide it into 2 rooms. That wall went up in 1994, according to the permits, but room 12, on the original blueprints, had a different designation, utility, no public access. "What does that mean?" I asked. "I don't know," Claire said, "but I think something was stored in that space originally, something the builders separated from the rest of the building. And when they put the wall up, they didn't know what they were dividing. They didn't know they were creating a chamber for whatever was in there." I hired a paranormal investigator. I know how that sounds, but I was desperate. The investigator, a woman named Susan who ran a paranormal research company, spent a night in the Neon Palms with equipment I didn't understand. EMF meters, thermal cameras, audio recorders. What she found was this. Room 12 had an electromagnetic anomaly. The reading spiked to dangerous levels, then dropped to 0, cycling in a pattern that didn't match any normal electrical source. The thermal imaging showed temperature fluctuations that moved. They traveled across the room like something invisible was walking around. And the audio recordings captured sounds that Susan said she'd never heard before, a kind of rhythmic, organic noise that didn't match any known animal or mechanical source. "There's something in that room," Susan told me, "and it's not entirely in our dimension of reality. It's bleeding through, partially present, and the more people who are aware of it, the more it manifests. Awareness is like food for entities like this." "Like what exactly?" I asked. "I don't have a name," she said. "Something that exists in the spaces between. Something that came here, maybe when the building was constructed, maybe when someone opened a door they shouldn't have opened. It's feeding on the people in your motel, not eating them, but consuming their presence, their reality, their sense of where they are and who they are. I had the wall to room 12 removed. Instead of a room behind it, the contractors found an empty space, 12 inches of hollow wall, nothing inside. They went further, removed the drywall, checked the framing. What they discovered was that room 12 had no back wall. It opened directly into what should have been room 13. But room 13 also opened back into room 12. The space was circular, or twisted, or impossible in a way that didn't make geometric sense. The contractors refused to continue. They said the wall configuration shouldn't be possible and suggested structural engineers assess the building. I never called the structural engineers. Instead, I had the entire section sealed, concrete poured into the space between room 11 and room 13, permanently closing off what used to be room 12. 50 cubic yards of concrete, 2 days of work, $20,000. The incidents stopped immediately. No more guests with missing time. No more sightings of impossible doors. No more reports of presences in walls. But the damage to my business was done. The Neon Palm's reputation was destroyed. Guests came once and never came back. Online reviews mentioned strange vibe and unexplained incidents. Word spread through the Vegas hotel community that something was wrong with the place. I should have closed the business. By all logic, I should have sold the property and cut my losses. But I didn't. Instead, I kept operating. I kept renting rooms. I kept people coming to the Neon Palms because it was cheap, because they didn't ask questions, because it was a place where you could disappear. And I kept Claire as my night clerk because she understood what had happened. And I needed someone who could recognize if it ever tried to come back. 7 rooms in the Neon Palms remain permanently closed. To guests, they're under renovation. In reality, they're sealed. Concrete in the walls, doors permanently bolted, no access. I've never told anyone the true reason for the closure. Not the city, not the insurance company, not the contractors. But I know the truth. And I suspect Claire does too. Sometimes on quiet nights, she comes to the office and we drink coffee and don't talk about what we know. We just exist in the knowledge that something was in this building, that it wanted something, from the people who passed through, and that we managed, barely, to contain it. If you ever stay at the Neon Palms Motor Lodge in Las Vegas, you'll notice that certain room numbers are missing. 7 and 12 and 13 don't exist on the west side. The numbering jumps. If you ask about it, you'll be told renovation. You'll be shown different rooms. Believe the lie. Because the truth is that motels are thin places. The constant turnover of anonymous people, all in transition, all in between, creates spaces where things can hide. Things that feed on disorientation, on the vulnerability of people far from home. We managed to stop whatever was in room 12, but I don't believe we killed it. I believe we just made it go dormant, and I believe it's still here, sealed behind concrete and locked doors, waiting for the day when enough people forget what happened, when the seal weakens, when awareness fades, waiting to spread again.